you guys. Okay, wow, this is part 2. I'm so sorry I had to cut that first one off in the first 15 minutes. I wish I could have completed it just to get it all out there for you guys, but this one's going to be good. I have some information for you, and I think it's going to be quite helpful in understanding these different aspects of narcissism. And really what my main goal with this set of videos is not to necessarily answer all the questions fully, because I'm not an expert. But what I do aim to do is open awareness and get people to start thinking about things, doing research on their own, and being driven to have a bit deeper understanding of this, rather than just jumping to conclusions, making quick assumptions, and things like that, so that we can actually start knowing and learning who is really who, okay, when it comes to stuff like this. I think it's really important, and that's pretty much my goal with these videos. I personally enjoy examining things like this. I always have. It's a passion of mine. It makes my brain feel good. My grandmother was a teacher. She was a researcher. She loved to study. She was always surrounded by books and papers, and she had them piled high everywhere. She loved to write, and she was just, although she was a teacher, she was an eternal student. And so am I. Even if I'm not in school, I love it. It makes me feel alive when I'm always studying, learning, researching, growing. And it's really the first time in a lot of years that I'm actually getting some time to really focus my brain back on this kind of stuff, because I was in a very toxic relationship that took up so much of my time, and being around things like that can really traumatize and damage your brain. And I've needed time for healing and recovery. Anyway, let's get back into it. Again, my disclaimer, these videos are just for educational purposes, just spreading awareness, sharing knowledge, my personal perspectives and experiences, and I will let you know if it is a quote, if it is something that I have done actual research on, and some of this information is about to be, and I will get a link in the description box citing the sources so that you guys can go on your own and check some of this information out, okay? All right, guys, let's get into it. Part 2 of why we're all narcissists, but not narcissistic abusers. But we're not all narcissistic abusers or abusive to anyone. Okay. I think there's just so much confusion on this in the world. It's so, when you start going down this rabbit hole, it's complex. I mean, psychology is, you know, it's complex and it's hard to grasp. The deeper you go into it, it can be. And so most of us for a long period of time have a limited sort of basic knowledge of what something is, what a narcissist is. Now, I heard that term all of my life, and I know I will have to have a part 3 to this because I have a lot of information for you guys. We're about to get into it. I heard that term a lot in my life, of course, and I was raised in that environment, you know, but I only had, you know, I never was really interested in sitting down and doing a lot of research on it, even though I studied psychology for years. Just things that I needed to know at the time, or whatever took my fancy. It wasn't until I started noticing a pattern of the people coming into my life, and then finally one situation, the last one, kicked it all off for me. I'm like, what is this? What is this atrocious behavior that something just isn't right here? It just isn't clicking in the brain, or I don't know. And that led me to begin my study. Addiction can also do the same thing. And it can be very hard to tell if you're involved with an addict. I come from a family of addicts, and addicts, like narcissism, can be on a spectrum. It really can. Addiction's addiction, but then again, some addicts are worse than others. Some act out more. Some are more severe in their addiction. They've had it for a longer number of years. Their thinking patterns and brain it operates differently, has changed over the years, all different levels of addiction, okay? All right, so let's get into, when I left off in the first video, I was talking about cluster B personality disorders and how those are generally feared and despised by people if they hear, oh God, NPD, APD, BPD, histrionic, ugh, because those disorders, that cluster of personality disorders tend to exploit people, abuse people, actually for the pleasure of it a lot of times. Yes, for the entertainment of it. They get off on it, okay? That's why people are like, ugh, really? Ooh, eek. So yeah, they don't have a good reputation, but it doesn't always have to be that way. All right, guys, as an overview here, like I said, my goal is just to get a basic understanding that there's a lot more to narcissism than people think. And when we say the word narcissist, which is very generalized these days for just about everyone and everything, we really shouldn't do that, because there's a lot more to it than that. And a lot of times, really cool people, really good people, are being judged without a deeper understanding of what all this really means. Okay, so I want the awareness to be more out there that this is way more complex. I mean, okay, we've got types of narcissism. I'm a Dr. Phil fan. I know a lot of people don't like him, and that's okay. Regardless of what Dr. Phil's doing now, I know he knows his shit, and I like Dr. Phil. Anyway, Dr. Phil talks about the big four. He also has some great videos on covert narcissism. Check them out. The big four, the overt, grandiose narcissist, the communal or community narcissist, the malignant narcissist, or the covert vulnerable. All right, that's the big four. All right, we've got types of narcissists. We've got either you're on the narcissistic spectrum, which we all are. Every last living human being is on the narcissistic spectrum. Now, how much of that is going to depend on you. And as for me and my narcissism, I mean, there will be a third and fourth video to explain all that. Going back into my past, I was in my more toxic traits and tendencies of narcissism and higher up the spectrum. I was never diagnosed with a personality disorder, however, so that's great. I was able to evolve, grow, mature, balance out my empathy and into my more healthy narcissism. And as for me, I can turn it on and off at will. Some days I might be a little higher up the spectrum with my narcissistic traits. Other days, maybe further down in my healthier narcissism and a little more empathy. Then other days, I might turn it up a notch and I might get up that spectrum a little bit with my healthy / maybe a little higher on the narcissistic spectrum narcissism that day, to motivate or to perform or to get the guts and the self-esteem and the drive to speak out or to protect myself with boundaries. But that's as far as it's going to go, because it's still part of my healthy narcissism. It's not ever going to cross that line into abuser. Now, I have had instances where felt like I was basically forced into a reactional abuse situation. I'll get into that in the future. I ultimately am responsible for that, and thank God I took responsibility and I got out of that situation. But there are all kinds of situations, guys, you see? So I just basically want to give everybody an idea of how complex this is. You can't just say, that's it, right there. I know what that is. 2 seconds I can tell that. No, it's impossible. You just really can't. I mean, you really would have to be around someone, evaluating their patterns day in and day out, taking in a lot of things and watching them over long periods of time. You really, and I hate to see that, you really cannot say, I don't like that attitude on that person I just watched in that 3-minute video. That's a narcissist. I can tell by, no, you can't. You need to know a lot more. All right, so we have types of narcissists and narcissism. And we're all on the spectrum of narcissism with traits and tendencies. which can be healed. Okay? And then there's the disorder. If you've been not diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And personality disorders are a form of mental illness. And they're very difficult to be around, okay? I come from a family of personality disorders and mental illness and anxiety disorders and addiction. So I know I've got lots of experience with it. So then there's addiction narcissism, okay? And that's a whole other deal. So you kind of get where I'm going with this. We have types of narcissism. We have the full-blown personality disorder. That one usually doesn't change, and there's no treatment for it, and they don't heal. They refuse to grow. They don't realize that they have a problem. Now, just being on the spectrum of narcissism, and your narcissism's high, and you used to be kind of selfish, or you're kind of selfish, and you this and that and the other, but you're not really abusive. I mean, it just depends. Or it can step over into getting abusive, but you still don't have the full-blown personality disorder. A lot of that shit can be changed. Yes, if you're just on the spectrum of narcissism, and it's getting kind of high, you're getting to the point of being too selfish, lacking too much empathy, you know what I'm saying, on the spectrum, but you've never been diagnosed with the personality disorder, you can change that. I know a lot of people that had high narcissistic tendencies some years back, and since then they have grown in their emotional maturity, their emotional intelligence. They're a little bit more on the empathy spectrum. That's higher for them, more compassionate. As time goes on, it will depend on you and what you want to do with it. But, you know, there's a difference there. If you don't have the damn narcissistic personality disorder, then it can be changed and realized. And trust me, you'll know when you're around someone who really has NPD, you'll know. You will know the difference, okay? But there's a lot of highly narcissistic people out there that don't have the full-blown personality disorder. Severe addicts can run a damn close race to driving your ass crazy and exhausting you, just like a person with full-blown NPD. All right, so that's kind of an overview on that. Addiction narcissism, really quickly, it's like basically automatically, depending on someone, how long someone has been an addict, they automatically become a narcissist. It fucks up their emotions. They become demanding, yada, yada, yada. All these things, very selfish, only out to get that next hit. Self-preservation takes over their whole damn life. It's all about them. They're so fragile. Look, I've been there and done it as well. I come from a family of it. I get it. I understand it. But I'm kind of sick of it. I've been dealing with it all my life. And it's caused me a lot of pain. And strip all that off of them, though. Sober them up. Get them clean. Deal with their childhood wounds, whatever trauma's going on. A lot of times they will revert back to their normal personality. They will make amends. They will feel remorse for what they've done in the past. And they will be more humble. And they're fine without that addiction, narcissism. But if they have full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, it doesn't matter. With or without their addiction, they are still going to not take accountability. They're still going to lack empathy. They're still going to be selfish. They're still going to have that in their core personality. And a lot of people do wonder that. Is this just the addiction? Or are they a narcissist? Or is it both? It's very confusing, and I'll do another video in the future. But basically, if it's in their core personality, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. It's always going to be there. It is what it is. It doesn't matter if they get sober or not. And you can kind of tell a difference. That's how I look for that. Okay, moving along. Some research I did earlier. Narcissistic personality disorder may be linked to environment, like I've been saying, parent-child relationships with either too much adoration and no discipline, or too much criticism that doesn't match what is actually going on in the kid's life at the time. It doesn't match their actual accomplishments and experiences. And that made a lot of sense to me. I was like, wow. But yeah, they think that it's either environmental, if a child receives too much leeway, no discipline, no guidance, too much pedestalizing, or an overly critical, ridiculing, shaming type of parent or early caretaker, that none of that really matches up with either the child's good deeds or the bad deeds. You see how that can get screwy? They aren't being disciplined when they need to be and getting the guidance when they're really messing up, or they're being criticized, but they're actually good kids and they're doing good things, and it's not matching up because they have a narcissistic caretaker or an abusive environment, something like that. And I did look into genetics. I wanted to know for sure because that's still a little questioning to me. I've researched it several times, and it's kind of confusing when it comes to, is narcissistic personality disorder genetic? We're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, we talked about cluster B and how those types use and abuse people. On Google, let's see, it said, regardless of a mental health diagnosis, abusive behavior is never to be excused. People make the choice, okay? It is a choice to abuse others, to manipulate others. I'm trying to be careful. I don't want to read word for word because of copyright issues. I want to be really careful with that. So that's why I'm kind of hesitating and rewording and paraphrasing. So bear with me, guys. Yeah, that is a choice regardless of your mental health diagnosis. It's a choice to abuse people, to manipulate people. You have a choice. It's not necessary. They don't have to do that. Some don't know any better because it's all they've ever seen. It's all they've ever known, but yet they are responsible for that behavior, period. They are responsible for learning better. Okay. And yes, it did say it is possible to live with the traits. It's possible to have traits of narcissism and live with that, or any other type of disorder without being abusive to people. Yes. And that's going along with what I was saying about healthy narcissism, or even being a little high on the narcissistic spectrum with your traits, or even being a little selfish or a little arrogant or a little entitled, but not crossing the line into abuse. You don't step on people, you're not selfish, you don't manipulate, yada yada. It comes in degrees, and I want people to realize it's just not as simple as they think. You just can't tell. All right, so traits, tendencies, or full disorder, NPD. Okay, I've got a link for you guys there. All right. This was from an article that I read. I'm going to put the link for you in the description box. And it was a quick article I read. I'm just going to give you a brief summary and paraphrase. You can look it up on your own if you'd like to and read it. Do more research if you're interested. It was an article called, "Is Narcissism Genetic?" Because this is another question I've always wanted to really know, and it confuses me. So it says the exact cause of narcissistic personality disorder, they do not know. Most researchers and mental health pros feel that it results from a combination of things, including, and I am changing the words a little bit, like I told you, it's not word for word. These things would include biological vulnerability, social interactions with early parents, caregivers, psychological factors that involve temperament. There are studies that show that a gene or genes, genetics for narcissism, can be inherited. I can't even read my own writing half the time, but that person also needs to be in the right environment in order for it to manifest. And I thought, studies show that there are genes or genetics for narcissism. It can be inherited. But the person also needs to be in the right environment for this to take place. And it made me think of my psych class when I went back to college in my 30s, how I learned that we can be born with a certain predisposition for something, a certain type of a predisposition for a certain disorder, but it not choose to select in the brain. It can bypass us depending on our environment. Whether or not it chooses to select in the brain can depend on the environment, even if we're born with a predisposition for it. If placed in a war zone of fear and anxiety and stress in our home, or ridicule or whatever, we feel unsafe, whatever, it can select in the brain and that disorder will develop within us. And on the flip side, if placed in a loving, nurturing, calm, supportive, and very safe environment, it can bypass us and that disorder will not select in the brain and develop. I always found that very interesting. The article also went on to say, just to paraphrase, studies, it said scant, I don't want to read it word for word, studies that look at specifically at whether narcissism is genetic. It said scant studies that look specifically at whether narcissism is genetic, although many theories as to the cause include trauma, abuse in early life, overindulgent parenting, genetic predilection towards NPD, and narcissistic parenting. According to a study in 2007, an issue of the International Journal of Neuropsychopharmacology, a specific gene called, and Lord have mercy, y'all, I'm going to have to shorten it down to TH2, okay? Tryptophan hydrofuckalacasase 2. Okay, a specific gene called TH2 may be implicated in the development of certain personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorder. TH2 gene is something that helps regulate serotonin, which is a brain chemical involved in mood regulation, guys. So I found a lot of this interesting. I'm just skipping through it. I will post a link for you. It's an interesting article about whether narcissistic personality disorder is genetic. They use the word narcissism throughout the article, and they didn't really distinguish between primary narcissism, healthy narcissism, and toxic narcissism, but that is another thing to think about. That's what I'm saying. All of this stuff is so complex, and it really needs to be understood. All right. I believe throughout that article, basically what they're referring to is the higher, more toxic levels of narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. It was concluded that in agreement with other studies, narcissism as measured by standard testing was a common inherited trait. That was in a twin study they did. The article was fascinating. So it also said technological advances such as brain imaging have proven that brains of those with bipolar disorder and antisocial personality disorder, both of which are in the same cluster of personality disorders as NPD, are not functioning properly. So studies have found that the brains of people, 2 of the 4 disorders in the cluster B area, 2 of those disorders, their brains are not functioning properly. That's BPD and APD, antisocial. The activity levels in the brains of those with BPD and APD are abnormal. Research studies involving the cluster B personality disorders have confirmed significant physiological brain dysfunction in 2 of 4 cluster B disorders. Just what the hell caused the problem, the brain not to function, they don't fully understand. And very little research, they say, can be done on narcissistic personality disorder, specifically because most people with NPD don't admit to having any issues, they don't want to go to therapy, and they're just very hard to work with, very hard to deal with, go to a therapist or anything unless they're forced. said a review of literature suggested that narcissism runs in families and that many narcs have had a narcissistic parent before themselves. But once again, does that prove it's genetic or a learned behavior? You know, there's a lot of research going on, a lot of questions. As scientific research on narcissism and other cluster B disorders such as NPD expands and results in better information, it seems that there will be a greater likelihood that genetics may play a role to some degree. You see what I mean? When I say it's confusing to just answer straight up yes or no if it is genetic. There's a lot of research still being done. There are some studies that suggest yes, it can be inherited. Certain things, though, would have to factor in and all line up. It can get kind of tricky, guys. It can get complex. But I do know that mental illness runs in families. Recommended... Okay, whoa. Where am I at? Whoa. There is no cure for NPD. We know that. They're very resistant to therapy and change. Recommended... if any abusive behavior stays the same as far as if you are around someone with narcissistic personality disorder, cut contact if possible. They cannot and usually won't change, and everything must be done on their emotionally abusive terms right now. Yep, that's how they are. But see, people that don't have the full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, we can back it down. Sometimes we can want to act like that, like, now, I want this done now. Well, shit, I understand. You're not feeling well. Okay, we'll do it another day. You see what I'm saying? If you're just getting a little high on the spectrum of narcissism,